The wave of protests across university campuses in the past month have highlighted that the issue of fee-free higher education for poor and working-class families, a promise made by former President Jacob Zuma in 2017, is yet to be realised. Every year since 2015, we've seen protests from unhappy students over exclusion and growing debt. This year, of course, no different. Higher Education Minister Bladen Nzimande, in response, has reallocated money, given more money to the Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS. He's also asked a special team to come up with some lasting solutions to providing free education to deserving students. Let's discuss this now with Jonathan Jansen, Professor of Education at Stellenbosch University. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Do you think there is actually a sustainable solution, or is this task team actually facing an impossible task?
There is a solution that's sustainable, but I don't think you are going to get there by having yet another task team. Remember, we had the EPFA Commission after the Fees Must Fall crisis of 2015-16. So unfortunately, these commissions and task teams are ways of delaying the inevitable. And what is the inevitable? That government has to find a way of restructuring the national economy, erasing student historical debt, and manage it better into the future. But this is a waste of time.
I wonder if there is a solution as well that might see the private sector very much partnering to come up with a shortfall. We know that the private sector does fund a lot of students, but is there perhaps a bigger role for the private sector to play here?
The private sector's role in scholarships and bursaries is already quite substantial, quite apart, by the way, of private foundations, and family trusts and so on and so forth that contribute hugely. And I don't think they're going to be able, the private sector will be able to expand dramatically given the COVID economy. So I don't, but they do contribute substantially. Whether they can do more, I doubt it.
Talk to us about historical debt. The students, of course, want it scrapped. The universities say if we do that, we're just going to collapse our institutions, and essentially we're going to end up with no credible universities. What is your plan? What do you think we need to do about historical debt?
Look, at the moment you've got two problems that cannot be resolved on its own, which is why you have these annual cycles of protests and often violence and destruction of property and just a destruction of the culture of what the academic institution is supposed to be about. So we're not going to solve this because students rightly want to study without the burden of debt. And universities, rightly, university executives, rightly wants to say we can do only so much. Otherwise, the institution, the organization falls apart. I know that because I sat in that hot seat, right? You've got to satisfy the concerns of both those parties. But you cannot do that without a third party coming in. And that third party, unfortunately, is the government. And they are not willing to take on this issue, which, by the way, sooner or later we're going to have to resolve. And that is to erase the national debt, then manage it better into the future. Because it doesn't help if you're going to erase the debt and then 10 years from now we've got the same problem. This is doable. A task team doesn't need to be told that or waste our time trying to get there. That's the solution.
So where should the money come from to erase that debt?
The money, first of all, you cannot do this without restructuring the national economy. In other words, you're going to have to look, at the economy and sort of say, what is it that now needs to enjoy priority? I'm of the view, and there's good evidence for this, that the private and the public rates of return to investment in human capital, as the economists call it, or in students, has huge benefits. In other words, there's benefits for the family and the individual, and there's benefits to the country. So we should stop seeing higher education as a burden. Higher education lifts you out of your economic distress and so on. And if you have that view, it's easier to get to the solution.
I mean, I don't think anyone is going to disagree that in an ideal world, we would pay to have, the taxpayer money would be used to fund higher education for any student who's deserving. But I ask again, where is the money going to come from? I mean, we saw the budget speech. money is so tight at the moment. Are you suggesting, for example, that money allocated to an ailing SOE is immediately diverted to pay off that historical debt? I mean, where will the money come from?
Well, if you look at the national economy, right, there's three things actually that you can do to give you the money. The one thing you need to do is to sort of say what is an absolute priority now and for the long term. And then you begin to sort of say, do we really need this defense budget at that level? Do we really need this kind of budget on, and so on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is efficiencies. We have one of the most inefficient economies in the country, right? And so you look for efficiencies in the system, by the way, including higher education, which I also think is in many parts of the country quite inefficient. And thirdly, you get rid of corruption. Corruption is the one thing that swallows up billions of rands every year that could have been available, okay, for us to get to this point. What does this mean? You need an executive leadership of the country that is willing to make those tough choices in order to deal with this problem, which is not money down the drain. It is money that is invested in the future capital, human capital of the economy.
What do you make of what the Higher Education Minister has already done? He has released funds to help NSFAS register more students, for example. Doesn't that suggest there is a spirit of trying to prioritise the needs of students?
Yeah, but it's not enough. I mean, there's been more money given to NSFAS. That is true. Universities have raised more money from independent sources. I used to do that. That is true. The problem we have is adequacy. And so what do? You try to limit the numbers, okay? As you saw in that failed case in UNISA, the department said, let's lower the numbers so that we can afford, the additional inputs. The problem is you can't tell young people coming out of outpass that you can't go and study because there is no money. That doesn't compute, and rightly so in my view. Young people should be able to study. We must make the tough political and economic choices up front in order to solve the problem of what education finance people call adequacy, enough money for young people to study.
Thank you very much for your time this evening, Jonathan Jansen, Professor of Education at Stellenbosch University.